right, welcome to the Corpus Christi Songwriter Podcast. I'm Jules.
I'm Jimmy.
I'm Jenna.
All right, I'm sitting here with Jimmy and Jenna. There's 3 J's hanging out here today. I've got some questions about, like, Jenna, I encountered you for the first time, I think, the 2023 Corpus Christi Songwriter Festival. And I think I might have missed your set or something. There was a lot going on at that point, but I caught your set at the Surf Club this year, and I really can't wait to get to the point in the conversation where we talk about the performance that you and Jimmy had at the Exchange. Because I probably should have said something about this on previous episodes, just because what you all did, that it was like, first, it was completely unexpected because there's stuff going on. It's after hours. Everybody, if we remember back to that, it was in February. It was cold. We had all just come from the surf club and freezing, our collective asses off. And so we all came to the Exchange expecting it to be warm, and it was not warm. It was like we were all trying to just like hold out for the heater inside the Exchange, and it just wasn't warm. And so here we all were in this sort of like open mic style situation. And, you two went up there, and I guess what was so, captivating and simultaneously disarming was like the intricacy of the melodies, the way that you two played off of each other, the interesting harmonies that you all chose to. It was incredible. And like I said, I want to get to that point in the conversation, but first,
thank you.
I really want to know more about you, Jenna. Like, 'cause there's so much about you. You're an actress. You are a director as well, as what I understand, right? Like So and you're a musician, and you have this like kind of sibling band called the Iveys, which over the years, it's like sibling bands have gotten more and more of my attention. Like people like, I don't know if you're familiar with a band called Willden. It's like 3 siblings.
Oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with Willden.
Yeah, they are incredible.
Oh,
The Thrilled to Be Here album was great. So why don't we just start by tell us, for all the uninitiated out there, like, who are you? What do you do? It sounds like Arnold Schwarzenegger, like, who is your daddy and what do you do? But just tell us more about you, please.
The question of who I am, that's something I ask myself every day, both on a philosophical level and also just my life is crazy. Jimmy knows a little bit about it. I have always found myself to be an artistic person. Things kind of just happened as I grew up, where opportunities presented themselves, and I took those chances. I was blessed to grow up in a musical family. So my dad has always been my biggest inspiration, and he just surrounded us with music. And it was never forced on us. It was never, you better pick up that instrument, you better play it. But it was in the air. And one of the side effects to that I sometimes have a hard time with is being the youngest of 7 kids, growing up surrounded by all sorts of genres and decades of music. Nobody really told me who was singing. So my knowledge is based solely on the songs, and I can't tell you half the time who sang it or who wrote what. And that's something I'm working on correcting. But I was just surrounded by all this creativity, and my siblings had a band back in 2008 or something like that. And I grew up going to their gigs, and they played at bars and coffee shops and stuff here or there. And then this was mentioned on a previous episode of your guys' Sonic Ranch recording studio. I don't know if Jimmy and I have ever talked about this. And when I was listening to it, Tony, I think, was the one that was talking about it. I thought it was so funny. I was like, man, I live within about 2 miles of the studio.
Oh, wow.
So it's crazy because my siblings' first album, that was recorded at Sonic Ranch Studios. And then later, that EP that we recorded, that was at Sonic Ranch Studios, Colors of Honey. I grew up surrounded with it, and then I joined the band officially in somewhere like 2017. And I remember having a conversation with my brother Arlen, because I had already been co-writing since I was about probably 12 or 13. He would just kind of sit me down and get my opinion on songs. And when I joined, I was like, you do know that I have a lot of other stuff that is going to get in the way, right? Like I'm going to be doing all sorts of crazy things. And he was like, yeah, but I want you to join anyway. And I was like, okay. So I jumped in, we did Colors of Honey, and then we toured with it in 2019. I was still in college at the time. And we had a successful tour, which for my siblings was a huge deal, you know, to be able to step away having made money that can go back into recording and to promotional stuff instead of just cutting even. That was a huge deal for everybody. Yeah. So I gained probably like, I don't know, something like 70 shows in that tour, something like that. And that was kind of the first like deep dive into touring and gigging constantly that I ever had. And then in school, I was in school for theater, emphasis on writing. And then that kind of transpired to be an acting emphasis, because the department head, Will Kilroy, wonderful guy, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. I kept telling him, no, I'm not an actress. I'm a writer. I'm just a writer. And he was like, no, give me your like acting resume. And I was like, I don't have one. And he's like, well, we'll work on that. So started doing theater, started doing short films and commercials and stuff like that. And after that, I ended up working, which I'm still currently doing, working in the film industry between Texas and New Mexico. So I work in the art department. I describe myself as like a catch-all art girl, I guess, the other day, because I do costumes, I do set decorating, production design, props, kind of wherever you need me to be, I can fill that spot. And again, I feel so blessed. I really didn't ask for most of this. It was just opportunities that came to me and me saying yes to the things that happened. So
hey, someone else brought that up, the art of saying yes, just saying yes, you know?
Yeah. I think I'm trying to remember who did bring that up on the podcast. I was doing like a catching up, trying to listen to your all's past episodes, and I finished almost all of them.
Nice.
But
well, I appreciate you listening.
That's
Most
so
people
cool.
don't. So I think you have 2 listeners. You might be the second. So
yeah, I mean, there's so much insight and wisdom, and even just hearing all of you talk about your own creative approaches to songwriting and to the craft is so inspiring. And there's always something you can get from it. Even if it isn't the way I do it, it's fascinating to be like, oh, wow, like that's the way you write. That's awesome.
Definitely. I wanted to know if you ever had a chance to do anything else other than what you're doing, because growing up in your music family, were you just automatically just singing, were just all the time, constantly, or did you try to get away from it at some point, like, no, this isn't me?
That's a great question. I never tried to get away from it. I don't remember learning to sing. I just sung, because we would sing siblings, we would do sibling harmonies, and like you were talking about Wieland and that band, and you hear this in a lot of sibling bands, the harmonies are something kind of otherworldly almost, because our voices are all from the same gene pool, right? And there's something incredible that happens in the vibrato, I think, where it pairs up in a really incredible way. So I was surrounded by that. And when you have that chance and you have 2 sisters, namely, and a brother, all of us are musical, but those 3 were the musical ones that formed the band, and they want to sing with you, you kind of just want to say yes. And so I do have a very vivid memory when I was probably 7 or 8. I had a Barbie karaoke machine, just one of those like big old things. And I had the song Tomorrow from Annie, the musical, the karaoke track. And I studied this. I studied it so intensely, and I memorized it. And then my sisters were in the bathroom getting ready, and I remember their clothes and everything. And I walked in, I was like, I need to perform for you and get feedback. And they were like, okay, go for it. And so I sang Tomorrow. And as soon as I stopped, they turned to me and they were like, no, that wasn't good. You were imitating the girl on the recording. That wasn't your voice. And I was floored. I had such gumption. I was like, how dare you? I've practiced this. I'm an expert. But I went back and I restudied it, and I came back to them and I tried it again. And I did it probably 3 or 4 times. And each time they dismissed me. And they were like, no, that's not your real voice. And when I was a kid, I was furious. And I was like, I will never sing this song again. But later in life, I was really grateful for that chance, because I think it really did teach me that I have a tendency to imitate. And it forced me to find my own voice in a way that I'm really grateful for. But yeah, I never wanted out of it. I guess the hardest it ever became was I ended up in the choir at our Catholic church, Our Lady of Guadalupe in Fabens, Texas. And we were, all of us, it was all 7 of us singing. And we were doing traditional music, newer music, all sorts of stuff. And we got asked to sing for weddings and for funerals. And the funerals were very consistent. And that was a really difficult thing to be a kid, be like 12 or 13. And even younger, before I was even singing in the choir, just being at funerals almost every other weekend, sort of a thing, that was really hard. And so that was the only thing I ever felt the weight of music in a way that was maybe a little bit claustrophobic, the kind of pressure of expectations that were put on us by our community. And I'm so grateful now for that. And I'm grateful I stuck it out. But I think trying to do that and also grow up in that was really hard. It was such a crazy experience of grief and death very early. So that was probably the only time I thought, maybe this isn't for me, for maybe a brief moment. But I never really had an active thought of quitting music or singing.
Okay. That's just, yeah, I was just thinking about that. I grew up with a family of cousins that we formed a band. We all learned how to play and sing. And so it's very similar. Like, I don't know. I just remember as a kid constantly running around singing to the point where my dad was like, basically, shut up, Yeah. But it was a good thing too. Like, I remember writing my first song in my head. I couldn't even play guitar or anything at the time. And I ran and sang it to my parents. And very similarly, my dad was like, that's not a song. You're just singing the same thing over and over again. Write the song. And I was like, what? I was so proud of this.
How dare you? Yeah.
Man, everything y'all are talking about is like so generative, man. And I think it's a little early to get like philosophical, but you said philosophy, like as you examine the question of who you are, right? And we brought up this concept of the art of saying yes. And then
I think that was Buddy Monlock that said that.
That's right.
Okay, was it Buddy? Yeah. So, well, all of this like plays into like some Nietzschean concepts of like, he says that like when you're born, you're a camel, meaning that you take on the inherited notions of the world and you just like this, you travel with it in tote like it's a hump on you. And at some point you turn into a lion, meaning that you just start roaring no, and you start refusing all of the inherited notions that you've been saddled with without any sort of, consent. You just inherit all this stuff, and then all of a sudden you start to question, and then you start to roar no. And then the third stage is when you get to simply being a baby and saying yes. And so when we ask questions to the spirit of like, hey, was there any point when you thought about getting away from music? Jenna, I think of your lived experience and what I'm hearing out of this is like, how difficult is it to say no when there's like 6 others who have come before you and your parents who have all said yes, in a way. And this is just simply like the place and the posture that you were always meant to assume in a way, like this was always reserved for you. And I think that's really beautiful. And Jimmy having a similar experience with cousins, y'all, I have no idea what that's like. I'm the only musician in my family. And those lessons, I couldn't imagine what kind of like 12 years old or however old you were with like a Barbie karaoke machine, your siblings just being like, nah, dude. That's not good.
Yeah.
That sounds devastating to me, man.
It definitely was devastating.
If you ever had an out, that was your out.
Yeah, you're right. That was my villain origin story right there. I mean, the fact that I've never forgotten it says something, right?
It's some retribution is brewing in the back of your mind, I'm sure.
I mean, we've talked about it since, and now we laugh about it because I've told him, I was like, you guys were such jerks. Like, you could have ruined my entire love of music in that moment. But the lesson of finding my voice is something I'm grateful for. And yeah, there is. It's a beautiful thing to grow up in a musical family. There's definitely a bit of pressure involved there. I think a whole nother level when you're talking about funerals, right? When you're talking about people in your community at their most vulnerable, asking you for a gift, for you to share your gift. That's a really hard thing to grapple with. But I think through that's actually how I was able to appreciate the gift I have and be able to say, I have all these different facets, but I exist as a whole, and this is something I enjoy, and I won't let the pressures or the voices that be take that away from me. And that was always really important. You know, even in the band, that was a conversation we had because, as we all know, unfortunately now you have to be a businessman more than anything if you're a musician or a songwriter. And it can be exhausting, and it can be an incredible workload on top of the creativity that's demanded of you to keep putting out these songs, right? And there were conversations I had because I used to have a photography business, and I've worked on video productions even through my teenage years. So I was very cognizant of the business side of it. And at one point, I probably took it too far within the idea of branding and marketing and success and making sure we're making money. And I kind of bounced back from that and was like, okay, some of that, yeah, we need to do it. But how do I find my peace, my truth, despite the expectations that I'm putting on myself and that others are putting on me? Social media, I think, is a really great example of that. I have a very difficult relationship with social media, and I have had times where I just don't use it at all because I think it's better for me as a person and as an artist not to even try. But I've also learned over time, it's allowed me such incredible connections. I mean, the reason I'm technically here right now is because of social media, because of the band getting contacted through Facebook by Jimmy, back in 2020 or whatever that was, pandemic.
Yep.
So, and then staying in touch through social media, you know, and so I've had to really learn how to reframe things in my head and make space for myself amidst it all. So social media, right now I'm in a good place with it where it's like, it's fun, it's connections, it's talking to my friends, keeping up with them. I don't really let myself doom scroll, as I call it. I've gotten a little bit better about that. That can be really hard, but I talk a lot.
I would just say that I feel like it makes perfect sense now that you mentioned that that you encountered a lot of funerals early on. That there seems to be a grace about you that is common to folks that have worked either in the death industry or have worked in end of life stages. Like what comes up for me is I had this the podcast that I started that kind of got me into podcasting. It's called No Easy Answers, and one of the in the first 10 episodes, I stumbled across this concept of a death doula. And a death doula, you know, for listeners, is like a person that basically guides an individual through an end of life stage. And it's, you know, it's really, in Canada, it's very popular, places where like alternative medicines are a little more accepted. And, but the reason why I bring all of that up is because, you know, those, the ladies I interviewed who are death doulas seem to place a priority on sort of inner peace, maintaining their sense of like maybe keeping baseline, a robust sort of emotional baseline, self-regulation, finding one's truth and being centered and present, and also leading with compassion and just having this way about them that I feel like, you know, when you are encountering consistently grief, we'll say, humanity, and staring that in the face without an exit, right? So you must be in the presence of that kind of grief, that kind of visceral emotion that comes to inform you greatly later on with your art in whatever, form that takes. So I say all that to ask you, like, being a person myself that has, like, I feel like death has a larger than normal footprint inside of my cognitive workings, right? And that certainly informs me as I go about my creativity. How do your early experiences with funerals and being in the presence of such, visceral emotion, how does that inform you throughout your various artistic projects and endeavors?
It's a great question. I mean, it informs everything I do. I haven't really had someone, I don't want to say call me out because that sounds negative, but I don't know if I've had someone address that within me. But I do feel like death has a really large footprint in my life. I've always been aware of it. Very young, I had to learn very quickly about it. And I think the way it's informed me, a variety of ways, right? I grew up here on a pecan farm in West Texas, and that already comes with such a history, such a culture, right? Multiple generations of pecan farmers, and this land that my grandfather and great-grandfather worked, like, that's already incredible. And you can just walk for miles, and I did. As a coping mechanism, I would just kind of take these long walks when things got to be too much. And so throughout that and my connection to my faith as a Catholic, there's such a cosmic sense in my own mind of everything, of all existence, right, at all times. And you hear about, like, microcosm and macrocosm, right? And for me, I'm a very big concept person, but I've always been fascinated by the way these huge concepts can come down and touch us in small droplets. And that kind of process, I think, really, if I had to psychoanalyze myself, really comes from those experiences. It comes from my faith. It comes from singing at these funerals and being around these concepts that for a child were far too large for me to comprehend, but I could witness them all the same. And then figuring out how to transcribe them into something tangible that I could understand as I grew up. And then as I continue to age, understand it better. And even being willing to let go of the things you can't understand, the mysteries that surround us and the things that you still don't. You don't know why they happened, right? Or in the moment you don't, and you think, I hope years from now this makes more sense. Yeah, I think it's influenced me heavily. 2016 was a huge year for me. I went through a very depressive episode because in our family tree, we lost several people within just 2 months, 3 months of each other. And one of those people was my godmother, Gloria Landeros. And she was this fiery, passionate, incredible woman, just this joy of life. And so much of who I am is because of her. And losing her at a point where in my head, I thought I had so much time because she was middle-aged. She wasn't old by my standards. Losing her so suddenly, she was diagnosed with lung cancer, and within a month she passed away. And when that happened, it forces you to ask a lot of questions about the world and about your faith and your God and everything. So many things you don't understand, right? And that year just ended up being terrible. We lost other people within several weeks, and it just was a spiral. And through that, I somehow came out of it. And I think I probably came out of it because of all my experiences of grief and death so young. I was able to learn, how do I feel these feelings? How do I allow myself to fall apart and be willing to be vulnerable and show that even to the people that I think I need to be strong for? And I had to learn, because that was kind of the only way, not to be dramatic, but that was kind of the only way to survive, really, at that point. So.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Wow.
No, I feel that deeply. I'm like very much so. I lost my mom when I was 14 and she was 41. We thought, I mean, she had diabetes her entire life, but wasn't anticipating her dying, you know, so young. And then a year later, my grandfather passed away, and same thing. It was just one of the time periods that change your life and kind of define who you are for the rest of your life. And so, yeah, no, man, sorry, that hit me hard.
So I think to someone like a Martin Heidegger, as a thinker that thinks through these sort of issues, you know, that like, you know, someone like Albert Camus writes something like The Plague or something, you know, and it's like we don't need a virus or a book to remind us that death is a specter that may be lurking around every corner, you know, but someone like Martin Heidegger gives us kind of a more useful way to think through these problems as he, you know, talks about the concept of living towards death, meaning that if one is always cognizant of one's death, then it compels one into authenticity. And it's only through the encounter with our fragile sort of mortality that one discovers what is truly authentic. And so there's a linkage there. And so when you talk about being vulnerable or being vulnerable to those who you feel you need to be strong for and showing that to them, I think there's real value in encountering these early encounters with mortality that sort of, especially the kind of, you know, when death visits us and it like violates our preconceived notions of like who should die and when and under what circumstances. It really kind of rips the fabric of our cosmos. Like it rearranges the furniture that we thought didn't move in a way. It like cosmically rearranges stuff. And so I know, like, for me in my writing, like there's like an urgency at times because I have to think into depth to find authenticity. But I haven't really heard anyone else express the way that grief you know brings them into authenticity through artistry, and so I just, it really resonates, and I appreciate that about you, because I wish, and these are the things that I tell more artists to do. You know, it's like it's a very complicated way of, like, when someone asks you, how do I write better songs, and my buddy Chisholm would say, I don't know, go suffer. It's a very you know complicated way of like of addressing that, of being like, no, actually go encounter your own mortality, find out what's truly valuable, lose it, mourn it, sit there in your grief, and then you will write stuff that is salient off the page, you know. So yeah, that's not really a question, but Jimmy, take it from there, brother.
No, this reminded me of a short story that, you know, I wrote when I was 15. Yeah, I guess 15, because I had to have been after my mom passed away. But in it, I wrote this line that stuck with me, and I bring it up quite often, which is, death in its most raw form is life's most tragic insight into the origin of happiness. And that kind of, I think, goes to what you were saying. I didn't have a question either. That just reminded me of that thing that I wrote. And so yeah, no, I feel like I've carried that shit with me my entire life, you know, at least since I was 14, if not earlier. And anyway, should we?
But it's like
someone tell a joke.
But it's also like every dream or every fantasy goes back to the womb. You know, it's like the opposite of death in a way. It's always a warm and sort of vignetted, sort of fuzzy contrast thing in your dreams. And to me, it always feels like, you know, we spend so much time, you know, on Earth avoiding death, when we dream, it's really back to the womb in a way. And
thank you for not describing it as moist. Can I just say?
Oh my God!
I almost thought you were gonna go there, and I was like,
no, it's a womb. It's the fuzzy contrast stuff that goes on, the dreamscape stuff, man. Jimmy, let's talk about your divorce album, bro, because this was that's
a natural
segue here, right? Yeah. We're talking loss of life, death of potentials, you know. But no, man, you So I've gone back and visited your So Many Things, So Much Stuff, album. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Jimmy.
I think backwards, but
backwards, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And you shared with me that Spaceman song, which I thought was exceptional, and then I went and I listened to a little bit of the Iveys, and that's right, listeners. I actually prepared a little bit for this conversation. It's for the Buddy Munlock episode. I had just woken up and was like, "Hey, how's it going?" Anyway, but yeah. So I went and I really saw, like, I felt I heard musical sensibilities that matched up really well, like between just a couple listening selections from the Iveys and what you did, Jimmy. They seem to fold in, or one could imagine they would fold in really well. And I know you went out to John Macy's and recorded a little bit out there, but the first time I had heard you two, I believe the first time you ever performed these things live was at the Exchange that night during the Songwriter Festival.
Yeah.
Could either one of you talk a little bit about that performance? Because it was just something that was stunning,
Well, I mean, I'll let Jenna take that, but I in my opinion, it was a long time coming. We've sharing these songs over social media, for like over a year, almost 2 years, and then finally performing at least a couple of them.
We've been talking about it for so long, and it's funny because Jimmy sometimes doesn't self-promote very well. Not to call you out, but you're not good at it. That's honestly a kind of endearing quality, though, so at least you're okay. But yeah, we talked about singing at the open mic that first night, and then he decided not to. And then the next night we were like, okay, let's do it. Like, let's just sing these songs, right? And that was the first time we'd performed them together. But to be fair, it definitely didn't feel like it, and I wasn't surprised it didn't, because when you're familiar with someone's voice and their songwriting style and their personality well enough, it's not really that new. It didn't feel like the first time. It was like, yeah, this is natural, this is comfortable. I agree also about the overall sounds. I think that there's similarities in the music, in the history of the Iveys, and in Jimmy's history of music. So yeah, it felt good. It just felt normal to me. I was cold. I was very cold, and I was really tired, but I was glad to just do those songs and just be kind of silly, and then sing these songs that are about heartbreak and really important subject matter. And I was just so happy that people connected to it, and that they wanted to talk to us about it. And that's all you can ever ask for,
Yeah. I mean, in general, these songs kind of evolved over time too. They weren't, there are kernels of ideas that I had early on, and then you helped take them over the finish line, make them what they are over this journey that we've had over the past couple of years. And so, my divorce album that I keep calling it's evolved. It's not really a divorce album anymore, because, I asked Jenna, please come on board and help me see this from a different perspective. And she very much so has, her voice lends the other side to that story.
Yeah. And that's been fun too, maybe fun's not the right word, but it's been interesting to explore that. How do I lend my voice? And I know we had very initial conversations. Communication is so important to me, and Jimmy and I had talked about it right away, about like, what kind of collaboration are you looking for, and like how flexible is it, and how willing. And he was very willing to just hear what I had to say, and so I kind of had the room to just dive in and offer my opinions. And then when we were in studio, John Macy's place is just awesome, and he's just such a lovely person. And we kind of stumbled through stuff that first day, and I think it was that first day that you played me I'm Fine, and you just had you had some of the melody for sure, and then I think you had some of the lyrics on the chorus, and obviously you had the guitar. And I asked him, because he was like, I don't know, I have this, and he just kind of gave it to me, and I was like, are you okay with me just kind of going crazy with it and just messing with this? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And so I ended up saying goodnight to him, and then I stayed up for about another hour maybe or something, and I wrote that, and then I pieced it all together, and I had some kind of a weird audio recording I think I'd taken so that I could show you. And then the next morning, like over coffee, I was like, here you go, like, how does this sound? He was like, oh wow, like, I really like it. And I was like, perfect, easy, like, let's keep going. And I think it's just a good pairing. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, so it's such an interesting, like, when I heard this story about, like, because the songs you're writing, or the songs that have been written that you performed that night, they're so it feels like an intimate glimpse into, like, the personal life of a relationship, like almost like you're voyeuristically witnessing something that you probably shouldn't, or you know, like, it's an impropriety in a way to view into that kind of intimate moment, you know, whether it's the, you know, the sort of like the pain of someone not having like needs met and feeling alone in a relationship, or it's like the bickering, you know, like, and the two things kind of fold in a melodic way to where, like, it's like you almost hear the whole goddamn relationship, and it's so universal by the end of it, you know. And Jimmy's line about, like, I feel like a bastard all the same is what I remembered in that. And, you know, I will say that, and I think a lot about this, man. I think a lot about how much is it appropriate for a man to sort of, like, within a song, to sort of dump out his relationship grievances, you know, like, as a man, you're not going to write like a Taylor Swift kind of breakup song, but the sort of venting that is permissible, like if we're violating someone like Ralph Murphy's law of, he was a Canadian country music writer that had the saying, he said, no whining, no preaching, no venting, is what he said, you know. And but we're, you know, some of these songs violate this, and in a way, it's like, as a man, I'm a little trepidatious to write out something that's so viscerally emotional within the context of a relationship, because it just doesn't have the same affective landing that how it comes from a woman's voice. But I think the way that the sort of introspective, masculine, sort of just like, I feel like a bastard, sort of just like speaks to this.
Right. I think it's to me, one of the things that I noticed in the songs when working on them with Jimmy is I have this concept I've been playing with a lot, and it's hard for me to kind of describe. I'm a very visual person. But it's this idea of like putting something at arm's length so that we can actually see it more clearly. So it somehow becomes more personal to us if we put it at arm's length. And a lot of Jimmy's songs kind of feel like that for this album, where that's, I think, the difference. It's not that men shouldn't feel like they can trauma dump or talk about their emotions or their trauma or their feelings. I think it's maybe just in the delivery, and that's the difference. And that's why, even though it's not done as often as I kind of wish it was allowed to be, maybe, I think that that's the difference, is that it doesn't feel tone deaf, is what I'm saying. There's like an awareness of the different sides. Even with Jimmy's initiative to ask me to come on, that already says something, right? That there's an awareness of there's two people here, and both are flawed, and things happen, and it's that conversation. So I think that's one of the differences. And then the other thought I had with writing these songs and collaborating on them, I really love doing this thing. I don't always get to do it perfectly well, or as well as I would like, but saying things without saying them in the music, figuring out a way to capture a feeling or a thought or a sensation without actually outright saying it. And there's cut and dry examples. Like in one of my new songs I've been working on, I have a line about I have all these like parallels that are drawn, and I say things without fully saying it. Like I say, like, I'm your best man's hand. And I've been talking about like a spade is a spade, but I'm not really using the terms in the way you would expect, but it's giving you that thought. It's giving you that sense. And so with Jimmy's stuff, I feel like the emotional side sometimes is conveyed in the music and the melody and the way that we deliver it. And that sense is picked up in a way that maybe we can't even quantify it or attach it to something that's more tangible, but it exists and you can feel it. Like the song I'm Fine that I ended up really loving, I think it's crazy, right? most people listening to it might not understand all the thought that went into every line and the overall song and all these different things that I had, because I'm kind of crazy, and that's fine. But I do think they pick up on some of that sense that, like you're describing, you're seeing this part of a relationship in a way that you're kind of like, I can't believe I'm witnessing this unfold. And that song gives you this sense of not being able to get through to the other person, not being able to get through to your partner. And that's when Jimmy's voice comes in with, she's always on my mind. And then mine's going above, hold me close and I'll stay. And it keeps doing this thing where it's like we're trying to talk to each other and we're not talking to each other. And then at the end, one of my favorite parts is when we say the same thing. It comes together, but we're still not connecting, right? And so you pick that up musically. Even people that aren't music nerds, I think, pick up that sensation from it.
Yeah, there's a dynamic interplay between masculine and feminine elements within these songs that really serves the subject matter, but it also like is very illustrative of like, it's just like there's a painting, like an ear movie that's drawn out for you as you take in this stuff. Well, that's John Porter's old management company name or something. Ear movies, you know. But there is like that dynamic interplay that happens in this music is something that I took note of immediately. Even within the context of my own like artistic projects, I have this thing I've been working into called The Siren and the Wordsmith, which is about that sort of like impenetrable wall of what happens when words don't get through to your partner, you know? And as someone who prides himself on communication, I think you've expressed that as well, Jenna, you know, like the wordsmith and the siren is just like this concept of the wordsmith trying to use his words and the siren being like, nah, come to these rocky shores, dude.
Yeah.
You know,
I love that concept.
You know, but I took notice of that immediately, and you know, like it's just what really, when I say it was like an ear movie, it really was like viewing into something that was like a vantage point into the intimate that one does not receive, and one was like kind of privileged to take in within that moment. So I'm really excited about hearing what comes out of Macy's place and these recordings and all that stuff.
Well, I guess we have to finish this thing now, huh?
Yeah, so. I know, right? No pressure, but you're like, okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, how many songs is this album supposed to be, Jimmy?
I think it's about 10. I mean, it's floated around, but I believe we've got about 10 songs fleshed out.
10 roughly. Songs. It's a good round number, man. It's like, I was talking to Michael O'Connor recently how like, you know, I made a 7-song album that gets referred to as an EP, which it informs me that 8 or more seems like it's safe, but 10 is like you're over the mark. And then something, and then even though that's how I feel about it, I feel like even if you made a 9-song album, they might still refer to it as an EP, possibly.
Yeah, there's something about the number 10 that works well for me with records, even when like so much stuff, so many things, I think has 11 tracks on it, and that bothered me so much, but I couldn't take any of the tracks off. So with this one, I'm like, I really wanted to make it 10. So we'll see what happens. But I believe that was the list, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm the worst about remembering stuff, but yeah. I think.
What projects do you have going on right now, Jenna? Is there like, do you have visual projects happening, productions, or can you tell us a little about what you're working on near El Paso in New Mexico?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to ask you about the Valley sessions, but we can get there. Talk about whatever you want to talk about, and then the Valley sessions.
Well, that's going to come up when I talk about being busy. In regards to music right now, I have some community stuff planned. I'm trying to. You guys were a huge inspiration for this too, but I'm trying to kind of stir up stuff in the community of songwriters here in El Paso and Las Cruces, because I've run into these issues where these people are just incredible talents, but they struggle to meet up or to talk about the craft, and they get discouraged. And I mean, songwriting's already, I feel like, very introspective and personal. So I'm trying to create what I'm calling like like a songwriter gang, like an email thread of like songwriting prompts, and just doing it like every week and kind of telling people, you know, write a song, send an audio file, and it's not necessarily for feedback. It's mostly just to share and just to kind of know what other people are doing. And if you can't get a song out, then maybe send me a poem or send an art piece, whatever you can do, just a way to generate ideas and creativity and connect people. And so all day today, I was reaching out to songwriters. Carrie was one of them, and just people that I thought of randomly where I was like, you know, I think this could make a really cool little group through email. So I'm excited to do that. And then Star City Studios here in El Paso, Eric Bozeman operates it, and he's an awesome guy. He's the manager there, and he's wonderful. We did our CD release with him back in 2019 or 2018, and they are starting up a singer-songwriter showcase, which they haven't had since the pandemic. So it's a pretty big deal that we don't have anything like that here, and it's going to be the first time we're going to get back to something like that. So a group called the Pie Sisters out of El Paso, Jez is, I think, the eldest sister, and she's been connecting with me to try and make that happen. So I'm going to help them any way I can, graphic design, promotional stuff. And then they invited me to also be one of the artists for the event. So that'll be cool. And then Valley Sessions. I don't know how much you know about it, Jules, but Valley Sessions is a music promotion company, if you will, out of Las Cruces, New Mexico, run and founded by Ryan Robson. And essentially, it's live sessions. So it's always the same take. It's not edited from different takes. And it's a live recording of an artist performing a song. And we might have multiple cameras because the community that's doing it, it's an art project, and they're all filmmakers like me, artists from all sorts of different backgrounds. So we go all out. We assist with costume, with set design, with everything. And we just get these really incredible performances. And the impetus for it really that I think caused us to make this happen was a yearning for authentic recordings of songs that we love. Because oftentimes I will go and I'll see someone live and I think they're incredible, and then I find their album and I'm just devastated by how overproduced it is, and it just doesn't capture me in the same way. And so that was kind of the thing we were trying to do here, and I think we've accomplished that. We've had a full season last year. I think we've done 15 or something like that, 14, and we're staying strong, and it's all volunteer, which is pretty incredible too. So we ask for donations and everything, but it's all volunteer. And we have one coming up this weekend with Sean Lucy, and that'll be really fun. And yeah, I'm the music director. I don't remember what they call me. I'm terrible with titles, but I'm essentially like the one that kind of facilitates the conversations with the musicians surrounding the material. What song are we going to do, and why, and how can we honor the song? And the locations are picked based on the song. And so I'm really excited to enter into the next season of Valley Sessions and start doing those again.
Oh yeah, and you did one as well.
I did.
Performance. It was at the White Sands.
Yeah. I did Shame in White Sands last year, and that was kind of the start of a lot of musical ventures for me as a solo act. So it was a really personal, big deal for me, because I've been on the stage. I can't claim to be a total rookie, but at the same time, it's really different when you've played in big bands and you've done a lot of bigger stages with a bunch of people, as opposed to it's just me and a ukulele just kind of doing my thing. So yeah, that was really special.
And am I mistaken? The ukulele is a new thing. You've been practicing it. Yeah.
The ukulele I picked up. It's been a little over a year. It's been maybe like 2 years, something like that. It's something I've only consistently played for 2 years, I want to say. And it just kind of happened. It was a gift. It was something somebody gave me. My family gave it to me. And then I was like, yeah, I'll play this. And then I didn't kind of intend to really focus on it. But then I was like, oh, this is really fun. Let me just kind of explore this. Yeah, Shame, that video was actually the first time I'd ever played in front of people on the ukulele.
Wow.
And so that was a pretty surreal experience because I felt like I tricked everyone. I was like, I don't know how all of you think I'm a professional, because here I am feeling very, very vulnerable and young right now. But yeah.
Hey, can I ask, of like, you know, the young lady in Balin, I think her name is Julia. She, you know, she plays her father's Telecaster, and that's a great telly, you know. And so I wonder, being the youngest of 7, like, is there your dad's Telecaster that you're trying to get to at some point? That's that you're in line for with your other siblings, or were all the other?
No.
No.
Yeah, no, my dad did play guitar, but my dad was a music lover. He didn't really ever get super into the musicianship of it. At some point he did when he was in college. I want to say he went to UT Austin, and then he ended up selling it. You know, he got married to my mom, kind of pursued different paths, but I'm grateful he never forgot his love for music. But yeah, unfortunately there's no like really nice guitar calling my name in the family. My brothers have some really nice guitars, mostly Martins, and they really love them. So I don't see myself getting them anytime soon, but yeah, I plan on actually getting my family. I didn't let them get me a birthday gift last year because I was like, just save up and then you can just get me a guitar. I was like, that'd be really fun. And so as kind of the first move, I want to get the Martin Jr., I think is what I was looking at. So I was thinking that'll be fun. Like it's more petite, which works for my size, and I love the sound of it. So I was like, let's do it. But yeah.
Yeah. And do you know how to play guitar very well, or?
No.
Yeah, that's what I was picking up. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be a huge learning curve. So
that'll be a journey.
Yeah, I didn't talk about that, but my first instrument was violin. So I played the violin when I was younger, and I ended up having a wrist injury. I developed carpal tunnel in my left wrist, and so I had to put it down when I was around 17, 18. And then in recent years, I was able to kind of work on some physical therapy for my wrist, and I got it back to a point where it's manageable. But yeah, that was my first instrument, and everybody's always like, wow, violin's really hard. And I did get to be pretty good at it. But that's very specific. It's very melodic. It's solo. Like you hear the line and you hear it very clearly. And I think it's crazy how much that pairs with my songwriting and the way I tend to focus on melody so often. But yeah, the whole strumming thing, the whole ukulele thing, even that was such a learning curve, you know. It's a totally different beast. I can have fun on a violin any day, and the ukulele, getting the confidence to do the percussive side of it was crazy.
Yeah. Wow. And I wanted to go back to Valley Sessions real quick, to specifically yours, because I liked following the whole journey of Valley Sessions, but I want to know what took you to White Sands for specifically that song.
Yeah, so Ryan always picks the location based on the song, and he had kind of I'm assuming he'd heard me playing the song here and there, just little snippets of it. And so he wanted to shoot at Valley Sessions. And as soon as he said it, I thought of that song of Shame, because I wrote it on the beaches of Corpus Christi. That's where it started. And so for me, the sand and the kind of imagery just was an immediate, I wrote it right after the start of it. I wrote it right after the festival last year.
Interesting. So, nice.
And that's where it all kind of started to come together. And then the White Sands just made sense for that. And we had a discussion later. I kind of got cold feet, and I was like, I don't know. I was like, this is like one of my longer songs, and I don't know if it's as accessible for people. And I was using all these terms, and he kind of convinced me. He's like, I think this is the space to do a song like that. I think it's okay. I think it's okay to do a song that is a little longer or maybe less accessible, and do something really special and vulnerable. And so I was like, all right. And so I did that song.
That's wonderful. And I love that you wrote that after the Corpus Christi Songwriters Festival in 2023. Claude Butch Morgan, he wrote one of my favorite songs of all time, the song called Heaven, I think it was after the first festival he had played, or our very first festival. He just was randomly in town and played it. And then, man, it's just stories like that make the reason for the festival that much more poignant, if you will.
Absolutely.
So it's why I want to keep doing this, because it's the inspiration of it, right? So
absolutely, and we need more of it. It's. I was really fortunate with Ryan because we are dating too, that it was such an intimate space that was created so that I could do this piece. And it's kind of funny. He asked me to do a Valley Sessions way before we were ever a couple. But there was this kind of vulnerable space that was created through it. And Valley Sessions is doing, I think, a lot of what CC Songwriters is doing. It's trying to just stir the community, stir us to action and show us that it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's important that we share. It's important that we do these songs, that we do these festivals, and we have to keep doing more of it, man. Like the fact that you guys asked me to even come out there and perform at the festival was such an honor. It was such an honor. It was a little bit of a surprise because I was sitting there thinking, man, I'm just this crazy kid that's doing all sorts of weird artistic things in New Mexico, and here I am in Corpus Christi playing some songs for people. But that's what it's about. It's about showing us that we're really not that far removed from each other. We're all a lot closer than we realize.
Absolutely. We're all just crazy kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy, doing artistic things.
It's something that I've thought about too, man, is that like, it's this incredibly weird notion, especially like going back to like a little bit of masculinity, like, man, that men or masculinity, it's this incredible notion that one should make their way through the world unscathed, like unaffected by things that will naturally scar us, impact us, hurt us, teach us, and so like when one stands in such a way that insists upon being unscathed, it's like a denial of our humanity. It's a denial of the very things that have molded you and shaped you and brought you into being the person that you are constitutively in that moment, And so part of the exercise of standing in that vulnerability on stage is like an affirmation of like, these are the things that have given me my shape, that have brought forth the person that stands before you now. And everything you all are speaking to is like, I just want to hang out with people who know about vulnerability and stand in that space, that can just sort of reach back from lower Alabama with vulnerability and like, just straight up like be like, this is me as a human being. And I felt like when you two performed at the Exchange, it was such a brave and sort of, in some ways, like kind of gauntlet dropping of like, here's, vulnerability. Here's what it looks like to look at like a bruised heart. So it was just, all the praise in the world for what you two have done with this project, and I can't wait to see where it goes. And I have to look up Valley Session stuff now too. Oh
yeah, please do. I don't have anything to do with Valley Sessions, but it's just a beautiful series. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So other than that, I mean, I wonder, like, as far as, because you're venturing into this now, Jenna, as like you're used to crowded stages with lots of people and larger things going on, right? And so you get out on a stage now where it's, you and just yourself, right? And a ukulele. And it's kind of confrontational, I would say. It's almost like the quieter the audience is and the closer the front row is to the stage, the more seemingly intimidating that performance can be. Could you maybe, what obstacles are you facing, if you wouldn't mind speaking to those things? Like, what obstacles are you facing in this sort of transition to getting out there, standing on your own? And I just played in Rockport recently, and every time I looked up, it was like the same person's gaze was just like fixed on me, and it's something that, like, you experience this stuff, whether like you're doing it for years and the spaghetti crowd still, like, the crowd where like you look up and it's like a mouthful of food and you're like, all right, that's what it's going to be like tonight as you're just playing in these places, but what obstacles are you facing in this transition towards like standing on your own on a stage with the uke as opposed to where you've been and what you've done already?
Yeah, I think some of my acting background helps a little bit with that. And that's not to say I'm acting, because it's very important to me when I'm performing my music, or like with Jimmy or anybody, if it's music, if it's not theater, it's very important that I'm authentic, that it's me and you're seeing me exactly as I am. Sure, I might be having to adjust my volume, right, and do specific things, but in general, you're seeing me in all my awkward glory. And in theater and in acting, what's helped with the nerves is this tendency to, I'm sure there's a better word to describe it, but to reframe negative emotions in a positive way. So it'll be like after the pandemic, right? I got cast in a show in Into the Woods, and I was playing Red Riding Hood, and I hadn't done a show in probably 3 years or whatever. And I was up there and I was in the wings and I was about to enter, and it was opening night. And I just had this like bubbling sense of just anxiety and nerves just come right up to my chest. And there was this brief moment of panic, and I had to reframe it. And I was like, no, this is excitement. This is like eagerness. This is excitement. Like, this feels good. I want to just go out there and just show everybody this stuff and just be nerdy with them and do this, right? So reframing helps me a lot, but it is wildly different. It is very vulnerable. I learned, it's a lesson I'm always learning, but I would say during the pandemic, when I had so much time to think, I really had to learn the concept of, in order to achieve something great, I have to let go of perfection. That was something that I really had to learn and accept, vocally and musically and in all sorts of capacities, right? And I started to notice it felt better if I was a little messy, and people resonated more with my music and with who I was, my art, if I was a little messy. So that's been something I'm constantly trying to reiterate to myself. But yeah, I don't know, like when I got up for the festival with Corpus Christi, I mean, nerves were definitely there. I do a lot of preparation to try and make sure there's something to rely on, right? So it's like, even when I get there and the nerves are there, well, if I've practiced it a certain number of times or whatever, there's a certain stability that I can kind of sit on, even if it's not as good as it was in the comfort of my own room. But I felt pretty at ease. I really did. I felt like this is me in all my awkwardness. I'll get more comfortable expressing myself, but in general, that's kind of what I'm after. I just want to be authentic. I want to be on a stage and be myself with these people. And I also have a little bit of an advantage. Ever since I was a kid, I've been eager to have hard conversations. I've always been the little kid that would kind of freak you out, where I would come up to you and ask you about something that makes you uncomfortable, including my parents, my poor parents. So yeah, I think that's something I rely on too, is that kind of confrontational element that you're talking about. I think it kind of excites me a little bit. So if I can just adjust and make it more of a positive in my head, I just kind of let it fly. You know, I did a songwriter circle here in El Paso a couple weeks ago, and I played the train song and I messed it up so many times. Like, I did so many things wrong. And I think it was because I had been working all day in cruises, and I had driven to El Paso, and it was like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and I was just exhausted. I made a lot of mistakes, but I had a blast. And people still came up to me and talked to me about the song, and nobody knew, which to me is astounding. Right? But nobody knew. I skipped an entire verse, and then I like combined two different parts that weren't supposed to be, and I was making all these errors. But because I was me and I was vulnerable and authentic, it resonated with people all the same. And that's what they latched onto.
That's amazing. And I love that you didn't stop and start over like a lot of people do. They just like, oh, I messed up, sorry, start over. If you don't stop, if you mess up and you don't stop, most people will never notice. Will never tell that to you.
They never know. And it's wild to me. And I've even learned just paying attention, right? Because I'm a really active listener to other artists. And so often there's moments where I'm like, wow, that was such an interesting choice. That's cool. Like, oh wow, that was unexpected. And then you learn later, oh, that was a mistake. Like you didn't need to do that. We don't know.
Sometimes those mistakes, those happy accidents turn into, you end up rewriting the song because like, oh, that ended up being better than the original. I just keep that.
Exactly. So yeah, that's been important to me, and especially so when I've been doing the solo stuff, because it does demand more. You're just by yourself. It's just you on the stage, and I think at one point in time I had a lot of notions about the industry that were not wrong, but they definitely were a little bit soul crushing in the sense of like, oh, your persona and your presence and this facade and all this stuff. And I think I had too many ideas about that instead of just, if I'm nerdy, if I'm goofy, or if I'm depressive, whatever it is, those things can all come out, and that's fine. Because if people don't like my music, they're not going to like that part of me anyway. So it's not something you should be focusing on. Just focus on the craft and focus on what you're trying to say and being authentic, really. Which I know that word it has its own weight to it, right? But I guess when I say authentic, I just mean vulnerable and raw.
Right. I think the search for authenticity is what we all have in common, at least on the screen or on this podcast today, and what I tend to search for in the music that I like and in the songs that I write is to try to be authentic. And I don't know. I think that's what I gravitated towards you for, as well, as for that very reason. So I truly appreciate that.
I would say, and this kind of ties back into some of the relationship you have with social media. I think, lately I've been stewing on, obviously, like Dante. I mention him every episode, but like at some point, early on in Dante, he encounters like Francesca or parts of like the Arthurian sort of legacy, and because what does he have to draw from, right? He's like writing this in like 15th, 14th century or something like that. So of course he's going to draw from King Arthur. But the point is he draws from there, and it got me thinking about like the sort of what I've called like an anchor affect of that time, which seemed to be like sincerity. Like it was like knights were sincere in what they declared and what they did and who they were. And so sincerity seemed to be like kind of the anchor affect. And then later on, a few centuries later, we get into authenticity, and we have like the Heideggerian notion of this in the 20th century. And but in some ways, we've already transcended the age of authenticity into like the age of visibility. Mm-hmm. Like we all wish to be seen, and part of the sort of split down the middle of what we're talking about is, yes, authenticity and being authentic on stage. But the other side of that is like how we are being seen, how our art is being seen, how what we do and who we are is taken in. So in some ways, it's like it's a desire to be seen in a particular way, a desire to be seen in an authentic way in this capacity on stage. Whereas the other side of that being social media, how does one appear to be? It's almost impossible to appear to be authentic through social media if all you get is this glimpse and this egocentric projection of the self. So maybe that's some insight into there. I don't know, man, but like I feel like, I don't know, maybe I got some high narcissistic tendencies, as I enjoy taking some self-portraits and getting a bunch of likes and dopamine receptors and shit like that. And some people like and do better with that stuff, and I think it's a different relationship social media is for men to women, artists in general anyway, based on socialized pressures and stuff like that.
I don't know. I think there's a danger there where people actually think that that's sincere, that's authentic, and they buy into that notion. And
that seems to be our postmodern condition, right? Is that like we have substituted the inauthentic for the authentic, and in some ways we prefer like the American petroleum-based cheese product to the nice I don't know, Manchengo or something like that. It's like our postmodern condition has insisted that we accept these heavily mediated forms of encounters. It's like we are deprived of authentic encounters. In many ways, it's like through social media, we get this sort of breadcrumbing of a veneer of a persona. And it's rare, but I feel like if I get an opportunity to have an authentic encounter, meaning like I get to look someone in the face and speak to them and have eye contact, and there's everything that comes with a person-to-person authentic commune that happens, right? And that's a privilege within the course of my day now, whereas like maybe 30 years ago that was the norm. So I feel like what will continue to draw people out, live music, are artists like yourself that insist upon an authenticity of communing, that provide this commodified thing now, unfortunately, because like we don't get very much of it. We don't get the authenticity and this particular type of visibility that's on offer through songwriters who are simply bearing their soul and self-emptying. So,
and we crave it, this is a tiny little aside, but on that same concept, ghosting, like where people just stop responding, right? That's a huge issue in this day and age. And I've learned that I do have a tendency to want to do that. There's like this fear of like, if I am in a bad space mentally, if I'm going through a depressive episode, or if I'm busy or something, whatever the reason, there's moments where I have a hesitation to respond, right? And I've tried so hard to adjust that to where it's okay if I'm not in a place to have that ongoing conversation, but it's okay to admit to the person that's writing me, hey, I'm not in a place to have this conversation right now. Like, I'll get back to you next week, or like, thank you for reaching out, but we'll reconnect later, whatever that may be. And I've started talking to so many people I know, so many friends, and they've never heard somebody talk about that. They're like, oh, like that's something I can do. And it's like, that's exactly something you can do. And I've learned so often they fall victim to this idea of, I forgot to respond, or I was in a bad space, so I didn't respond. And now I feel terrible about it, and I'm really awkward and uncomfortable. And I don't know how to like express the regret and engage in a conversation. And I've tried to tell them, like, you're doing too much. Like, you don't need to think about that. Be vulnerable, be honest, say, even if it's been months, right? And Jimmy knows this. I've had different points where I've struggled, and it might be a while before I get back. And I always still reach out, and I'm like, hey, I'm really sorry. Like, this thing happened, or I was doing this, but I do care about the thing you sent me, or I am getting back to it, and I am reconnecting, I just wrote a family friend back. They wrote me all the way back in like October, and her message at the time was just, it was too much, right? She's wonderful, but it was so much information, I didn't know what to do with it, and I just left it. And then time went by, and then I felt myself thinking, oh, I feel guilty, whatever. And eventually this was just a couple days ago, I was like, oh, I'm just gonna write her. Like, I'm just going to reach out to her and be like, happy St. Patrick's Day. And I did. And it was wonderful. And we had like a brief conversation. And so, that idea of, I love the way you phrased it, the idea of being seen. And it's important. And I think that we've developed a tendency, in part through the internet and social media and our screens, to not really remember what it feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just stewing on all of that for a moment here too. Yeah.
This is more like a therapy session at the moment.
It's like, why is it in an age of ever increasing connectivity so difficult to connect?
Right.
It's like we have all these modes. I'm talking to you like we're in the same room right now, and this is a conversation that is meaningful, I feel like, and has gone to places. This is part of the reason why I got into podcasts. I was like, man, when COVID happened, I was like, the world doesn't need another Zoom concert. What we need are conversations. And for whatever it was worth, I wanted to be part of those conversations. But yeah, it's like we're Marshall McLuhan comes up for me as a thinker, as a guy who said, back in the 70s or something, he talked about basically he called it hypermedia, I want to say is what he called it, which was the confluence of telecommunications and visual technology and cameras and everything. And he said that through telephones and through technology, we would transcend time and space. And truly, in a way, it's like I'm talking to you. You're in El Paso, Jimmy. You're across town, but we're all talking in real time right now over video. We can see each other, and it's like, and it's this wild thing where it's like we're on a screen and we're mediated, and these are empty calories in a way, because we get the feeling of having communed and having taken part and engaged in a conversation, and we get all the sort of like, you know, accoutrement, the side dishes of what seems like a nutritious meal that should provide us ample fuel for the day. But it's a heavily mediated encounter that is through a screen that is not the meat and potatoes and root vegetables and substance worthy of our time and spent in this brief journey from womb to tomb, you know. Yeah. And I hope that, I mean, maybe the lesson is that, like, through all of this sort of mediation, that we come back to a central valuing of community, because that seems to be the only thing that centrifies, like, of all the visions of songwriters that have gotten together to form sort of collectives or seek out places where songwriters can congregate or form them. You know, it's the aspect of community. And even, you know, as an atheist, when I speak to people that are like apostates, they tell me it's not the church itself or the faith or the sort of cosmological sort of guarantee of a deity. It's really the community that they regret losing, that they miss and wish they could regain, you know? So yeah, hopefully there's just like a centralization of like a value on community that comes out of humanity collectively coming to our senses at some point and being like, demand.
I think so. I have to be optimistic, because I'm sitting here and you're right, we're having it digitally, right? But the fact that the three of us are having this conversation, the fact that so many people I know from all sorts of different backgrounds and ages have had similar conversations with me when presented with this topic, right? That says something about the yearning and the desire for connection and community and authenticity and vulnerability. I feel like that we're never really going to get rid of that. I think that exists. I think there's a reason, even when I had I used to have a photography account that was really active on Instagram, and I would accompany each photograph with writings, and it was usually poems or just stream of consciousness. And so many people, it was a tiny account, but I had so many people talking to me all the time. So many people reaching out, having conversations and talking about the stuff I was writing. And it said something to me about how much or how desperately people want that. They want to be seen. They want you to say the thing that they're scared of saying themselves. And I think that's just a truth that we've all witnessed as songwriters. And I don't think it's going to go away. I think, I don't know if it's going to be a dramatic revolt, right? I don't know if the internet's going to crash or if social media is just going to like burn in flames the way I almost wish it would. I don't think it's going to be that dramatic, but I definitely know more and more people that are doing what I'm doing, where we're creating limits on our phone. We're limiting screen time. We're trying to kind of restructure our own selves to where it's like, I am parenting myself. I'm not allowing myself to get on this many times or doom scroll, or, you know, I'm encouraging myself to read more books, to go on more hikes, to go on walks, things like that. And everybody I know is kind of doing the same thing. So I have faith.
Yeah, I hope that you don't get off of social media completely, because I'll miss your posts about eggs. I mean, I think that's
vital.
I think it was we connected through having you on, having the Iveys on for the early on during the pandemic for our shows that we did virtually. But then I kept in contact because he always posted about eggs, and they always looked amazing. And then so we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for your egg skills.
There you go.
Egg posting.
But yeah. So any more philosophical?
That's all I got, man. This has been a wonderfully sort of like, this episode has been one of my favorites that we've done, and the conversation's been so deep and
yes.
On a much more like meaningful level than purely like self-help. You talk about like kind of self-parenting that people are doing and imposing their own social media limitations and stuff. And it's like, I saw this meme that kind of tore me apart the other day that was like, someone said, very few of us that are adults now consider those around us as full adults, because insofar as we've been stripped of the demarcations of adulthood, of like mortgages and children and all these other sort of expectations that a lot of middle-aged people now have not reached by no fault of themselves, right? But like the demarcations of full adulthood have to do with emotional maturity, and they're like internal signifiers now, which is and so when someone says something like, hey man, I'm not like in a space to have this conversation right now, but I'll reconnect with you in a couple days or something like that, I've always been like, yeah, that's perfect, great, thank you for informing me of this stuff. And more tender and detailed communication is definitely something that'll get you a little further too, man. And I wish we had better outlets in self-help to look for increasing our communication effectiveness, stuff like that, tired of the 4 agreements here. I've heard that too many times now and shit, so yeah. But Jimmy, you got to ask that question we do at the end of every episode, right?
Yeah. After this deep conversation, let's get to the hardest question of the night. The almost famous question. What do you love about music, Jenna?
I thought of this all week leading up to this podcast.
Wow, you were preparing.
Yes, but it was anxiety induced. Don't give me too much credit. It was, oh man,
reframe it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like how do I try? Yeah, you're right. Reframe it, make it excited. But how do I try and encapsulate something that's just been so integral to my journey into adulthood, and my experience through childhood? It's crazy. But if I had to say, what do I love the most about music? It's probably the way it connects all of us. I think it really is found in the way that each of us has a different relationship to something that is somehow magically universal. I think that's incredible. I think of the imagery of like a river. I use this all the time as an analogy for songwriting, like a river above my head, right? And these streams come down and they touch me and they touch other people. And there's something incredible about that because each stream is different, but it's all from the same source. So that's my answer.
I love that. A river above my head.
That's great.
It's perfect. Yeah. And we have the title of the episode, I think,
A River
too.
Above My Head.
There you go. That's all cool. Right, Jenna, thank you so much for having this amazing conversation with us. It was a pleasure, as always.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you all so much for inviting me.
Thank you. And we'll hopefully we'll play some music again soon and finish that damn album.
Yeah, we got to finish that album.
Finish that record, y'all.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
We'll talk to you soon.
Y'all take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.